What if the moment you thought you'd found clarity, you found yourself lost instead? You've pierced through the veil of illusion, seen the machinery of your patterns, and stepped out of the world's deafening noise into a silence that feels both sacred and disorienting. This is the untold paradox of spiritual awakening, not the blaze of purpose you expected, but a quiet void where meaning seems to dissolve. Here's the journey no one warns you about, the sacred stillness after the revelation, where the soul pauses to rewrite its truth. Have you ever stood in a silence so deep it felt like the world stopped breathing? At first, this stillness is a sanctuary, like stepping out of a burning building into clean air. You've shed the weight of false identities, the need to perform, the hunger for approval. But slowly meaning begins to fade, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet disappearance, as if your soul dimmed the lights on life and forgot to turn them back on. You stop striving, not from despair, but from a sacred exhaustion, a hollowing that feels strangely peaceful, yet unnervingly still. This is the paradox. Awakening doesn't always ignite you. Sometimes it empties you, leaving a haunting question. Why do I feel so empty now that I see the truth? Why does the clarity of awakening sometimes feel like apathy? For the sensitive ones, the seekers, the empaths, the inward travelers, this emptiness is not a mistake but a stripping away of false motives. I recall a friend, spiritually attuned and fluent in the wisdom of Eckhart Tolle and Alan Watts, who emerged from a dark night of the soul with crystalline insight. She saw through the illusions of achievement, identity, and external love. Yet 2 months later, I found her lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, adrift in a stillness she didn't expect. I thought awakening would set me on fire, she whispered, but I feel extinguished. This is what Carl Jung called the liminal space, the sacred terrain between the ego's collapse and the self's birth, a chrysalis stage where the psyche dissolves before transforming. What if this void is not failure but initiation? Jung spoke of the negrado, the alchemical blackening phase where the ego dismantles, but the self has not yet risen. In modern terms, it looks like demotivation, a loss of drive, ambition, or even identity. But this is no dysfunction. It's a holy pause. Your psyche is rewriting its myth, rejecting what's artificial or inauthentic. The goals you once chased, born of a need for validation, fade like mirages in the light of a deeper truth. Our culture fears this stillness, mislabeling it as laziness or depression, but Jung warned that society numbs this phase, unable to grasp a transformation that doesn't look like progress. You're not lost. You're being reformed by something truer. Can you feel the quiet pulse of your soul stirring in the darkness? This liminal space is where the unconscious rises, bringing forth what you've buried: grief, rage, unmet needs. Jung called this shadow work, the foundation of wholeness. The ego panics, craving action or clarity, but the self whispers, let go. I am forming something deeper. This is enantiodromia, Jung's principle where extremes transform into their opposites. The manic striving of the ego swings to the soul's stillness, not because you're broken, but because balance demands it. In myth, this is the hermit's archetype, the withdrawal before rebirth, the cocoon where the psyche dissolves into formlessness. It's not collapse, it's alchemy. What does it mean to live from the self, not the mask you once wore? As you linger in this sacred pause, a new energy emerges, not the ego's urgent roar, but a soul-led hum. It's not born of anxiety or performance, but of alignment. Jung called this the symbolic life, where dreams, instincts, and synchronicities guide you. You stop chasing applause and start responding to what feels true. This isn't inertia, it's devotion to wholeness. You create not to impress, but to express, choosing peace over performance. The self doesn't demand success, it seeks presence. And in that presence, you find a new fuel, sustainable, soul-powered, and unshaken by the world's storms. Have you ever wondered if your spark hasn't vanished but transformed? If you're wandering this inner night where no light shows the way, know this: you're not broken. You're in a profound psychic shift, a metamorphosis our culture has no name for. The old fire of ambition burned away to make space for a deeper flame, one that hums with truth, not noise. Jung never promised ease, but he promised depth. This is not the end of your awakening. It's the beginning of your becoming. Trust the quiet pulse within. It's calling you not to return to what was, but to build what has never yet been. What happens when the world's noise no longer pulls you, but your own silence terrifies you? This is the moment where many falter, mistaking the sacred pause for stagnation. The ego, so used to running the show, screams for a script, any script to follow. But the self, that deeper center Jung described, doesn't operate on timelines or applause. It waits, patient and persistent, for you to listen. The stillness you're in isn't a dead end. It's a gestation. The psyche is metabolizing years of false striving, clearing space for a truth that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Why do we rush to fill the void when it's trying to teach us? Our culture has no patience for this in-between, this sacred descent where nothing seems to happen. We're taught to equate stillness with failure, to fear the quiet as if it's a sign of brokenness. But Jung saw it differently. He called this phase the confrontation with the unconscious, a descent into the depths where the soul begins to speak. The goals you once clung to, the identities you wore like armor, dissolve not because you failed, but because they were never yours. The silence is carving out space for what's real. What if the emptiness is where your truth begins to take root? In this liminal space, you start to notice subtle shifts, a dream that lingers, a gut instinct that nudges, a moment of synchronicity that feels like a whisper from the universe. Jung believed these were the language of the self, guiding you toward wholeness. You're not aimless, you're recalibrating. The old motivations, fueled by fear, lack, or the need to prove, can't survive here. What emerges instead is a quiet call to align, to move not because you must, but because it would be a betrayal of your soul not to. Have you ever felt a pull so subtle you doubted it was real? This is the self's voice, not loud like the ego's demands, but constant, like a heartbeat. Jung's concept of individuation isn't about becoming extraordinary, it's about becoming real. It's about integrating the ego with the deeper self, creating a psychic totality that connects you to the greater whole. In this phase, you might feel like you're doing nothing, but you're doing everything. Listening, witnessing, allowing the soul to reshape you. This is the sacred labor of becoming, and it begins in the quiet. What if the world's definition of progress is what's holding you back? We're conditioned to believe that transformation looks like action. New goals, new plans, new hustle. But Jung knew that true change begins in the dark, in the unseen. The psyche doesn't follow a 5-year plan. It follows its own rhythm. The stillness you're in is not paralysis, it's preparation. The self is not interested in your resume or your accolades. It wants to know what makes you feel alive, what is so true it hurts to ignore. Can you trust the mystery of what's forming within you? This phase after awakening is disorienting because it's unscripted. The ego loves a map, but the self thrives in the unknown. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and that becoming often feels like unraveling. You're not losing yourself. You're shedding what was never you. The relationships, careers, or dreams that no longer resonate aren't failures. They're evidence of your growth. The psyche is pruning what doesn't serve your soul's truth. What if the silence is where you learn to love yourself? In this void, you confront not just your shadow, but your light, the parts of you that were buried under roles and expectations. Jung believed that awakening requires making the darkness conscious, but it also means reclaiming the brilliance you've suppressed. The emptiness isn't punishment, it's permission to stop performing and start being. You begin to ask different questions. Not what should I do, but what feels like home. Not how do I succeed, but what makes my soul say yes. Have you ever noticed how the world feels different when you're guided by truth? As the self begins to lead, life becomes a dialogue with the unseen. You notice symbols, dreams, moments of alignment that feel like the universe winking at you. Jung called this the symbolic life, not an escape into fantasy, but a return to soul. You stop trying to dominate life and start participating with it. Ambition transforms into devotion, not to external rewards, but to what's real. This devotion moves mountains, not through force, but through presence. What if your awakening is asking you to redefine success? The self's motivation isn't about climbing ladders or collecting praise. It's about embodiment, living as the truth of who you are. You might find yourself creating without an audience, saying no when yes is expected, following wonder instead of checklists. This isn't laziness, it's courage. It's the courage to live from alignment, to trust that what feels true will lead you to what's meant for you. Jung knew this path wasn't easy, but it was honest. Can you imagine a life where your soul feels at home? This is the promise of individuation, not perfection, but wholeness. The sacred pause you're in is not the end, but the beginning of a life led by the self. Fatigue, doubt, and grief will still visit. They're part of being human, but the ache of self-betrayal fades. You begin to move from a place of peace, not pressure. You create, love, and live not because you must, but because your whole being says yes. This is the soul-powered life Jung envisioned. What if your story could light someone else's path? If these words stirred something in you, share your experience below. Have you felt this sacred pause, this disorienting stillness after awakening? Are you still walking the path back to your true self? Your voice, however unfinished, might be the lantern someone needs. If someone you know is struggling in this silent void, share this message to remind them. Real love doesn't demand we shrink, and the most vital connection is the one we forge within. Subscribe and join this journey beneath the surface, where we explore the psyche's hidden architecture and the soul's quiet whispers. Until next time, trust the path. You're not lost, you're becoming.